Hi. Recently, I've seen a lot more people get into Warudo blueprinting, and I've seen wonderful big blueprints with very elaborate redeems and sequences and all sorts of really cool effects. However, I see a lot of people use, or well, yeah, reuse a lot of node strings by copying and pasting them into either new blueprints or into the same blueprint, and then they end up with like really really big graphs that are really hard to read, and oftentimes the copied nodes only have like very slight and small differences between them. So if you ever have any kind of function that uses like 10 nodes or something and you want to have the same effect happen somewhere else, they basically now have 20 nodes, and then 30, and then 70, and then 140, and well, you catch my drift. It gets very big and it can get bloaty and like I said, hard to read. But Warudo has a solution for that, which is function nodes, which basically lets you define groups of nodes that you can just reuse and give different parameters, and basically allow you to make your blueprints very easy to read and also to test. As a little example, I have a very, very simple scene. It's basically just this little cat prop. There's nothing else in here. There's just a camera and a light so we can see what's going on. And I have a little blueprint here. So I'm not going to go into the actual logic of this blueprint, but what it basically does is it takes in a flow and then it does a bunch of stuff that basically makes the kitty jump like that. And we also have like a little value here that basically defines how high the kitty jumps. So if we want to make this really big, we just set this to 1 and then pew! Cat goes off, flies into space. Okay. Anyway, let's say I want this to be a redeem, but I also want to like reuse it like in a bunch of other places. So what we can actually do is we can use function nodes. So if we go in here and then we go into our trusty node search, we just search for function. And we have a few nodes here, but the important ones that we're going to use today are define function, which well defines a function, and the flow function, which basically calls a function. Now, very important, whenever you define a new function, it needs to have a unique name. So in our case, it would be, let's call it kitty jump. Kitty jump. All right, we're gonna ignore the rest for now. But the moment you have a name in here, you can already call it through the flow function here. It's right here, kitty jump. There it is. Now, also very important, once you select the function, it will always look up the name of here. If you ever change this, this doesn't get updated. You need to click it again and then select the new one. Very important, can lead to errors if you accidentally change the name of a function because you think you have something that is a lot more descriptive, and then nothing works anymore because the flow function does not update. Anyway, we want to define this function, so we just connect this to the same as our invoke over here. And that's literally it. Now, every time you basically call this function, it calls all of this. So to just demonstrate, here's our kitty, and now we literally just call this kitty jump function, and it jumps. Yippee! All right, so how do we use this now? We can go on another blueprint. Functions are global, so you can use them wherever you want. And we have a very simple Twitch channel redeem here. So we have our Twitch channel points redeem node over here, which gets called every time anyone on your channel would redeem anything. And then we basically just check for the reward title through the switch node. And our redeem here is called kitty jump. All we need to do is just have a flow function instead of copying over all of this over here. We just use this, do our kitty jump, and now whenever this would be triggered, it would just make the kitty jump, even though it's a different blueprint. And you can use that anywhere you want. You can use it in other blueprints, in other sequences, wherever you need. Now, let's say we want to expand this a little bit and we want to let the user decide how high the kitty should jump. For that, we can add a parameter. So if we go back to our define function node over here, in our first little blueprint over here, we can add parameters. So let's define a parameter for jump height. The moment you put the name in here, you actually get a little output over here, which you can then use in your function. To make this a little bit easier, you can also define the type. Now, a jump height in this case would be a float. And you have a ton of types that you can actually, like, if you just go through here, you have all these types that you can use. But we just use a float, which is basically the float over here. And now if I drag this over here, I can just connect my jump height to this float. And then you also see in the flow function, we have a jump height now. So let's set this back to 0.1. And now if we test this again, just with our flow function here, just a jump. And if we increase this, there's a higher jump. Now you can reuse this everywhere you want with different jump heights and can basically set however you want this. And you can do the same here. I think there should be a to float. Yeah, string convert to float. Usually you would do like a proper check here, but I'm just gonna connect it like this. And now people can basically use your redeem input. Let me actually make this bigger so you can see it. So redeem input to decide how high the kitty should jump. Now, you might look at this and think, oh great, now I need to go back to Twitch, I need to make the redeem, I need to make the text input, I have to go into the chat just so I can test all this. However, functions can help us here as well. Since we can't really change the reward title and the user input here, what we can do instead is just make a new function. So let's get back to our function nodes over here and define a new function. And let's call this one just redeem. And our redeem usually has, let's call this redeem name, not Bane. Name, redeem name. There we go. And we know this is text, which is a string. So if we search for string, we now have a text field. And we have a user input. So let's go in here, call this, we can just call this user input as well. And let's make the type a string as well. String, there we go. And now we can basically replace this one over here. We disconnect all of this and just connect it to our newly defined function instead. So our invoke goes here, the redeem node goes in here, and the user input goes in here. And what that means is you can just now use your flow function again, set this to redeem, and just connect the same things here, right? Your reward title to the redeem name and your user input to the user input. Now this works exactly as before. However, we now have another advantage. We can literally just copy this node down here, and we can just type in what we want to test. So if our redeem name was hydrate, and we then run this, if you look over here, nothing happens because this is not the redeem we're looking for. Now our redeem is actually called kitty jump. So let's say our redeem is actually kitty jump. And our user input is 0.1. Now if we do this, the kitty jumps. And if the user input was higher, the kitty jumps higher. Now this also allows us to really quickly test, what if somebody just writes some nonsense in here? Well, not much happens, it just bounces, because this just basically turns into a 0, so it has a jump height of 0, but it still does the like little scaling effect. And that basically allows you to just quickly test the redeems without having to go back to Twitch every time and just use the redeems all the time. Let me show this a little bit bigger. So what I usually have is I just connect this to like a redeem function and then have like all my redeems here and then connect these to all the other functions that I have and then put them all into their own little blueprints and make everything nice, tidy, and small. Very testable, very easy to read because you can literally just look at the name of the function as long as you, of course, name it properly. and see what it actually does without having to like stare at all of this every time and then wonder what this was supposed to do. Anyway, I hope this helps you. I hope you enjoyed the little kitty and enjoy seeing it jump around. And yeah, I'm looking forward to see what you do with this. Bye bye.